Dave, my internet works today. Welcome, welcome, welcome.
Glad to be here. So excited to be back today.
Dave, every time we do this, I always hold my breath when we hit start because I'm waiting for my internet to say, you have no connection, and then have that big exclamation point right in the middle. It always terrifies me.
It's so frustrating. I know I dealt with it for over a year. It affected webinars that I was teaching. Finally, we seem to have got it figured out after having someone come out to our house multiple times and look at what was going on. So hopefully they can get it figured out on your end so you don't have to worry about it. It takes a lot of stress off if you don't have to worry about what the internet's doing.
Well, Dave, I did bring a special present with me today.
Okay.
Can you read what
Oh,
that says?
I do see what that says. I see that you're all on board with the world champions.
Yeah, so the Atlanta Braves won the World Series last night. I stayed up really late to watch it, and I brought my orange hat to match since, that's their colors, right?
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, I think that's what their uniforms look like.
Yeah. Well, I just thought it was exciting, and it's nice to move to a new area and have things like that to go to. But that's not why we're here, Dave. We're here talking about retirement today.
Well, that's what it's all about. You get into retirement and you just spend your life at the ballpark.
Yeah. Every day is a Saturday, right?
That's true.
Well, I want to welcome all of you who are joining us live today and those watching on replay. Thank you so much for being here with us today. Always, every time we get here, every Wednesday, we talk about retirement. And Dave, today we're switching it up a little bit because I want to give a little bit deeper dive because we come on and ask you so many questions, but we really don't get a background. We don't get a lot of information on what we're talking about. So off the cuff, you're trying to give an answer to something that people are saying, generally, this is the direction we're headed. But I really want to dive a little deeper today and help you understand a little bit more of a background on who we're talking about today.
Okay, that sounds good.
So let me get my first one up here. So let's talk about Ken and Marty. So they are both age 57. And Marty was a stay-at-home mother until the kids went to middle school. The last 15 years, she has been working part-time in her sister's cleaning business. Ken is a school board member for their city. When he retires, he will have a teacher's pension. Permitting health, both plan to continue working until 68. Marty plans to help with her grandkids in her retirement. Outside of relying on Social Security and Ken's pension, they want to know what the next step is for planning their retirement. Marty plans to help with the grandkids more, and Ken wants to potentially turn his love for woodworking into a side business. So with that, Dave, I want to ask the question as we get going. What would their next step be to secure their retirement?
One of the first things they're going to need to do in this situation is start seriously looking at that Social Security because they've got a couple of issues going on there. Now, when we look at Ken's situation, he's getting this government pension and what's going on. I believe that's, I got the name correct there, right? Yeah, we look at Ken's
Yep.
situation. He's got that pension coming in. That's probably going to affect his Social Security unless he's got enough substantial earning years that he's paid in prior to this position. So they've got to look at the effects of that, figure out what his Social Security is going to look like. Will he be subject to the windfall elimination provision? What effect will that have on their benefits? And then they really got to start looking at Marty's Social Security as well. Because again, depending on what's happening with that government pension, where she's only worked 15 years, if you look at that, Social Security is based on 35 highest years. So she's going to have a lot of zeros in there, which means she's going to get a substantially lower benefit. She's working for a cleaning business. Now, that doesn't always mean that they're getting paid at a lower rate, but oftentimes the positions inside of that business are not going to be paying top dollar, maybe paying $15, $20 an hour, somewhere in there. So you've got a situation, they've got to figure that out because what they may be expecting for Social Security, maybe talking to friends and others, or what they could do now. I mean, they're 57. They've got some years here, especially on Marty's side, where she could get some extra work years in there. So I'd recommend number one that they start there. That's where I would say, hey, first steps is you got to figure this piece out.
And Dave, we talk about pensions. I mean, a lot of people come on and ask questions about this. How rare are these now? And is this something that we don't really know enough about?
Yeah, there's only 13% of America that has them. The problem that we're facing and the problem that those who have them are facing, these are underfunded. Over 90% of the pension plans in America are underfunded. So what happens there? What's the out? I lived in Puerto Rico for 5 years. The pension plans in Puerto Rico are substantially underfunded. Government just recently sold the power company, and part of that package was for them to pay a bunch of extra money in hopes of being able to secure up these pensions. Well, that didn't end up happening. They weren't able to get substantially extra money. I mean, no company that's got to make a profit is going to pay millions and possibly billions of dollars extra for something that's not worth that much. So what is that going to look like? I think that's one of the big issues people have got to consider. How secure is the pension you have? Because if it is having issues, if you don't believe that somehow it can get secured over time, your best option may be to take a lump sum distribution, which many people can do.
And if you are joining us live, we are talking about Ken and Marty, and we're talking they're at age 57 and they're looking to retire, and they're trying to figure out what they need to do to secure their retirement. And along this, Dave, we were talking about they plan to both continue working until 68. It doesn't say if they're taking Social Security, but what do we say a good time is for Social Security? Because if they're getting to 68 and say, hey, we're just going to take it right then, but maybe you're saying, wait, hold off.
Yeah, so there's a number of things that we've got to consider about Social Security, and especially even in their situation. Now, if they said, hey, for some reason I want to claim it earlier than that, if they're working till 68, they're going to be subject to the income limit restrictions up until they reach their full retirement age. So we've got some issues there, and others who may be looking at claiming their Social Security early and still working, you may have those benefits reduced. The other thing that you're looking at too, CR, is you're correct. For him, he's definitely going to want to wait until age 70 for his benefits, assuming he's been paying in. Again, if he's paid nothing in because he's had a government job throughout most of his life, not going to be that big of an issue. But you want that highest earner who's going to wait until age 70. But then you look at Marty and you say, okay, depending on what's happening with Ken, am I better off to take the spousal benefits? If so, again, depending on the opportunities and when they claim, her best option would be to claim at full retirement age, because at that point, the benefits aren't going to grow any greater after that. So just a ton of issues. I mean, this is where we look at this. Many people think, oh, very simple. We just claim our Social Security whenever we choose to do so. All going to work out. We get our money. Well, you could lose tens, if not hundreds of thousands of dollars by making the wrong decision here.
And I want to remind those that are with us live, go ahead and submit your retirement questions. We have some deep questions that we're diving into, but I don't want that to change for those that come on and have a question. So if you have something for Dave, and we're talking, if it's in Social Security, as we're talking about, if it's in Medicare, if it's in long-term care, go ahead and submit your question. And with that, Dave, I do want to bring up our next one here. So I have.
Let me quickly go back to this. I was just thinking of one other thing. When Ken's looking at his woodworking and what he likes to do, there may be an opportunity there in retirement to somehow get his wife involved. Meaning from an ownership standpoint, maybe she owns the company and he's just providing services there. And why do I say, he may look at doing this? Because if she's only got 15, and again, she's going to work out another decade, it sounds like. So maybe she's at 25 years. She may benefit from having extra Social Security income earnings during those retirement years. Even once she claims her Social Security benefits, she may be in a situation where every year they've got some additional earnings, her benefits could potentially go up, based upon the way things are claimed. So all of this could be taken in, again, becomes a family situation when we talk about Social Security and the benefits that are out there. But just want to talk about that briefly, but go ahead, CR, and go on to the next situation here.
All right. So we've got John, age 55, and we're going to do kind of a short version here, but he would like to retire early due to chronic knee and back problems. He said 2 years ago, he lost a spouse to cancer. Having worked his whole life in the food service industry, varying between serving, cooking, and managing, he has built it looks like a 750,000 balance in his 401k with a 4% match the last 4 years as the area supervisor for a food chain. He and his wife never had kids of their own, but they legally adopted his nephew, Trey, when he was 2. Trey is now 23 and about to graduate college. John wants to know if he will be okay with this 401k and the Social Security benefits. More specifically, so Trey doesn't have to worry about any care for John, what would be the best option for long-term care should John need it?
Yeah, a lot of things here. Let me kind of address the general overview question there. Maybe the first one that came out as it relates to the amount of money that they have available. Now, federal government tells you should have about $375,000 per person saved up for your retirement to match your Social Security. Now, that's going to be, again, for the average American. Well, average American's income is going to be, much lower than, many people, especially that we talk to, that are coming in and doing planning with us. So if we look at it, the best thing John can do is say, hey, what is my Social Security? What's my expected living cost? And then be able to take a reasonable distribution out of that 401k, which is going to be somewhere around 3%. Does that give me the money that I need to be able to live? Now, if it doesn't at age 55, obviously may have to do some more work. He may have to put some more money into his retirement account. But from a long-term care situation, he's got some issues, from a general long-term care insurance perspective with that chronic pain that he's having with his neck and his back. He's not going to qualify. There's no insurance company out there that's going to sign him up for long-term care. Now, that being said, once in a while, there's group plans through an employer where, because they've got such a large group of people and they realize that the cancel rates are going to be much higher than it is for an individual signing up, oftentimes he could get into a plan there, even with these issues. But by himself, never going to be an option. So he's going to have to look at either self-funding, which he really doesn't have enough money to do if he wants to leave something for Trey. Going to have some other family member step in, which maybe he's got some other family that could do that, or look at life insurance retirement plan may be an option for him to be able to put a plan in that would allow him to use that death benefit. But I can get his concern. I can understand it, because it's one many people face, and there's not a perfect solution out there.
And if you are just joining us, we are talking about John. John is age 55. He's looking to retire because of his chronic knee and back pain. And he's recently lost his wife a couple of years ago. And we're talking, as Dave has talked about here, is this plan for long-term care, and if he should need it. Dave, there's another question I have that comes about with John here is, will he run into any issues with Social Security since he's receiving his deceased spouse's Social Security benefits?
Yeah, when we look at it from a Social Security standpoint, well, there's a couple of things to look at. Number one, you're going to be able to get the benefit of the higher of the two Social Security amounts. And the other nice thing, when we're talking about survivor benefits, you can start with one and then switch to another. You don't have to take them all initially like you would when you're living, which they have is called deemed filing, where if you file for one benefit, you're filing for both. So it may be a situation where he could continue to get his deceased spouse's benefits and let his grow. Let them grow until he reaches age 70. And then at age 70, switch off from the spousal benefits or survivor benefits, is what they're referred to from a Social Security standpoint, onto his own. So there's some opportunity and some options here, but definitely something he's going to want to make sure he looks at and figures out what's going to work best for him.
And Dave, with this too, it's always hard because we're talking age 55. We're not 65 here. So if we're looking at what John has, what potential risk do you see that could happen if he does say, I'm retiring today, I'm age 55, what am I going to see in the future?
When you look at the amount of money that he has, you look at what inflation rates are doing, you look at a stock market that seems to be on steroids, that nobody believes can keep going the way it is, he's going to have some issues, in my opinion. I mean, this is the problem. Unless you're just independently wealthy, and what would I say that number is? Probably 3 to 5 million. If you got that much money set aside, I think you can figure out how to get through with a reasonable cost of lifestyle going through those retirement years. But when you look here, I mean, he could end up living 40 years. I mean, even though he's got chronic pain, doesn't mean that's going to necessarily kill him. It's not necessarily got a heart situation or a kidney problem or other things that often kill people early. So if he's retired for 40 years, you look at that could be problematic. And we see it with many people, CR, they just retire too early. We've got the fire community. You and I have both spent a lot of time talking to people in that environment. I like their enthusiasm, the financial independent retire early, but I don't think they're considering health insurance. How does he deal with health insurance for the next decade until he can get onto Medicare? Yes, he'd get exchange insurance, may be able to get discounts off of the exchange, but all of those things are just going to get more and more and more expensive. And he doesn't have a real big bucket of money to be able to help get him through that many years.
So Dave, the last question with this is what he has now enough to retire early? It sounds like you're saying no already.
Yeah, I don't know what his cost, how much he wants to spend. I don't think it said anything in there about what he expected his lifestyle to be. Now, if he expects to be able to live off of just Social Security alone and then be able to use that savings just for shock and aspirational expenses or for supplemental income, maybe, but I'd be very careful with it. Again, what we don't realize, 5 to 10 years of additional work in our 50s goes a long way to help us when we're in our 80s and 90s. Once we get to that point, you just can't fix it. I mean, he's saying, look, I don't feel good now. Well, wait till you get into your 80s or 90s. You're definitely not going back to work. You're definitely not going to be able to do anything about it. So, yeah, I get very cautious when people are talking about retiring early and they've got this little bit of money.
And I want to thank you for joining us live today and those on replay. What we're doing is we're changing our format a little bit different today. We're breaking down some of the stories, and we're kind of dissecting each of these and going through and figuring out what options we have. Because as we come on here and we throw as many questions as we can at Dave, not always do we have a good backstory. Not always do we have all the information. And so we're breaking this down a little bit more. We're dissecting it. So Dave, when I'm throwing these questions at you, you have a little bit more of a history that helps understand what we're looking for. And like you're saying here with John, is he might be able to just survive off of his Social Security, but you're saying that there's a lot more things we need to look at, especially when we're headed into retirement.
Well, that's super tough too when you look at it and what the average retirement payments are from Social Security. I've got a sister right now that's going through this situation. She's somewhere around 65. Sorry, 6 brothers and sisters, including myself, 6 kids. Huge family. I don't remember how old everyone is, but she's somewhere around 65, 66. She's been getting Social Security. She's getting a divorce, which is sad in and of itself. But her Social Security CR, her take home, she told me the other day, $1,062, which is just below what the average amount is. It's not like, hey, it's way below what others are getting. She can't live by herself. I mean, when you look at it saying, I'm getting $1,062 in this day and age, I mean, the rent she's finding for just a single place she could live in above 500. Most of them are 750. Well, now she's got a couple $100 to buy food, groceries, everything else she needs to do. So it is becoming very problematic if someone's expecting Social Security to cover that. My big concern is, even on this situation, you retire that early, you're going to have some shock and aspirational expenses. Shock, you have a medical condition that you got to pay for. Maybe the roof needs to be replaced, the car breaks down. Aspirational, hey, Trey wants to go do something. Senior year, he wants to be able to go on some big trip, and you're going to pay for that. Well, what happens? People start spending that money too fast, start pumping it out of there, saying, hey, I got, all this money set aside, whatever it is, 700,000, 750,000. I mean, if you look at that, all of a sudden that seems like a lot of money. Before you know it, you just spend it down, spend it down, spend it down. So again, just things people have got to look at, not saying it can't work, but they've got to do some planning, or he's going to wake up and have some issues one day.
And Dave, I have one more story here from Sharon and Mike. So let's get Sharon and Mike up on here. So Sharon is 49 and Mike is age 55. So let me give you a little story with both of these. They own and operate a chiropractic center that offers massage therapy, physical therapy, exercises, etc. They would like to sell sell it to their son for full ownership of the practice and retire in 10 years. Currently, they will have Social Security and Roth and 401k investments in both their names for retirement. However, recently, to boost their retirement funds, Mike would like to invest in other options. Their retirement plans are to move out west and move close to their daughter in Colorado. So that's kind of our story. So let me pull up my first question I have here on this is, what the best investment option for them if we start out?
Yeah, so let's start with the basics of what we want to do. So basics are, we want to be able to take their age as a percentage of 100, and we want to principal protect that. We want in investments that aren't going to go down. Market drops 20, 30, 40% tomorrow. They're not going to have to worry about it. Now, when we look at, so that could be an annuity, that could be a life insurance product, that could be a structured note, various options for them to do that. The other part, what they're going to want to look at it is probably with the 10 years they have, they can still look at the market, getting that money in the stock market, because generally that principal protected portion, we're taking the bond portion of the portfolio out and saying, look, we're going to set it inside of something that's going to work better, perform more efficiently, outpace inflation, all these things the bond market's not doing right now. They would still be able to get into the market. Now, I know there's a group of people out there that are very strong on cryptocurrency. may want to put a very small percentage. I'm not one that would say, hey, go take all your retirement and put it in cryptocurrency. Gold is always a good investment when we're trying to hedge inflation, and even real estate may be. There may be some options there if he moved it into a self-directed plan and we're able to set up some real estate investments, especially in a Roth account. So again, it's going to come down to looking more into their individual situation, but start with principal protected, and then again, stay diversified. Put it in the market. You've got 10 years. You're able to take advantage of that period of time. Now, as you get closer, you got to be very careful. Make sure you have money set aside that if the market does go down, you're going to be able to use that money first, that you're not going to have to dip into your funds when the market's underwater as it is.
David, it sounds like they have money set aside. So we're talking just with not only for Social Security, they have the Roth and the 401k. But what they're talking about to me is they're trying to boost their retirement funds. And like you talked about with cryptocurrency, what I bring this up because I want to know what we're doing wrong when we talk about this, because sometimes we feel like we don't have enough money when we get closer to retirement. So either we panic or we start to find the next hot thing. For example, if we take these other currencies, these other ones that are showing up and disappearing, overnight. But what are we doing at the end here that's causing these issues for us?
Yeah, a lot of it is the way we look at things. This morning I was watching the news. It comes on. We've got Tennessee lottery here, like many states have, and they're sitting there on the news promoting that there were these 3 individuals that ended up winning on the Powerball inside of the state. Now, I don't know a lot about the lottery, so forgive me for those of you that are experts in it. But basically, these 3 individuals end up winning 50 grand. So it wasn't the full 100 million or whatever the dollar is, but they're sitting there promoting what a great thing this is. We've got 3 individuals that won $50,000. Well, they never show on there all of the thousands, tens of thousands, maybe hundreds of thousands that never won. Nobody's going to put there in the ticker symbol or there come at the end and say, yeah, you know what, we had 1 million people put money into this thing that lost, $10 million. And these 3 people, they got their $50,000. That's never told. It works the same when we look at retirement assets. We look at cryptocurrency. Those that are winning, they're going to tell you about it all day long. Those that are losing, when the market goes down and they have to pull money out, they're not saying a word about it. You're not hearing about those stories. So that's the problem. We often get caught up into the hype, the excitement that the news or other people are telling us is going on, and don't look back and say, hey, you know what, that may work, but it's really usually just a small segment of society. The more I can stay consistent, the more I can follow traditional tried and true investment methods, better off I'm going to be long-term.
And Dave, another question I have from this too is where we live in retirement, is that affect anything? For example, they want to move out west and move closer to their daughter in Colorado. So is there something we need to be looking at as we're getting ready to retire in different states, even if we're looking at Medigap? What kind of things are out there for us?
Yeah, great question, CR. That there's a ton of things that people need to consider when they're doing this. I love the fact they're trying to get closer to family. I think there's huge emotional, psychological, and even maybe financial benefits of being close to family. I guess depending on how you've taught those kids. Sometimes maybe it's the other way around. They still expect you to pay for everything if you're close and near them. But that's one thing. You've got to look at the taxes. If you're coming from a state like maybe Florida, Texas, looking at some of these other states where you've had no state tax, now all of a sudden you're going to have Colorado state tax, which I don't know, 5 or 6%. You've got to look at that. The cost of living. Again, depending on where you're coming from in the country. Now, if you've moved there from maybe Mississippi or Missouri or some of these other places, maybe it'll be a little more expensive there. If you're going out of New York, probably less expensive. So all those things have to be taken into consideration, because life in a different state could end up costing you substantially more or less than what you're paying currently based upon where they're living.
And Dave, just to remind everyone, we are talking and breaking down what Sharon and Mike are proposing. Obviously, they have a business. They're looking to sell that and give that over to their son in about 10 years. Dave, even looking at that, I know that you are the CPA part and you're thinking about all the tax pieces of this as well. And you're looking at all multiple pieces of this and not just the retirement side, but you're saying, hey, there's additional information you may want to look at, obviously, if you're selling your business and moving forward.
Yeah, and the same thing with the the way that's structured. Do you structure it as an installment sale? I mean, the nice thing with family, usually you got some freedom in the way that you structure that. Obviously, the business has been successful for a long period of time. Probably not a whole lot of risk that it's going to go under, like unfortunately so many startups do. But they've got a lot of options there as well, and they should take that in consideration. We don't know the dollars they're talking about here, but if they're getting a substantial amount of money, maybe $1 million out of this company from their son, maybe it's better to take it in smaller tranches or getting more money each year. Now, that being said, we do have some situations now where tax rates could go up substantially over the next 5 to 10 years, even the next year for capital gains, depending on what's done. So all of that's got to be taken into consideration. I think that the long and short of all this, CR, is people have just got to plan better. They can't just go and make these decisions. I saw with one of my friends, go back, and this was like 20 years ago, CR, when I first started in the accounting industry, talking to one of my friends. They decided they were going to move to New York out of Las Vegas, and they were getting double the income. I think at the time they're making 37 or $40,000. Got to New York making $75,000. Their lifestyle sucked. They obviously they had to now pay for parking. They had, if they had a car, the car insurance was twice as much, rent was like 3 times as much, and they're like, this was the worst decision I ever made. It didn't make my life better. It actually made it worse. And again, they were looking at it from just a sheer economic standpoint, not because, hey, I want to live in New York and I love the area. They just wanted to be able to earn some more money and be able to save. And they're like, no, it was just the opposite. It wasn't long before they moved back to Vegas, took that lower salary and said, look, I'm just in a better position being here.
Yeah, I definitely can see that happening. And Dave, I do want to squeeze in one more question. If we go back to Sharon and Mike again, they're 49 and 55, and they want to retire in about 10 years. But if they waited to retire by an extra 2 years, how would that impact their retirement funds?
It's going to vary based upon each individual. Now, if depending one on how much they would spend during retirement, but two, how much they can save. I mean, if you look at it and say, look, if they can maximize the savings during that period of time and not draw down any additional income out of the retirement, minimum benefit's going to be $52,000 per year. That's an extra $104,000 because they've got 401k accounts. They put $26,000 per individual per year into those accounts based upon it once they reach age 50, and are over age 50. But it could have a huge impact, and we see that many times. Our recommendation to people as we look at planning, or my side, if I'm educating people, is say, hey, take a couple extra years if you can. And maybe it's even just part-time. Maybe you say, look, I'm burned out, just can't do this anymore. We'll try it at part-time, see if that'll work for you. And many people find, hey, if I'm not doing 40 hours a week or 80 or whatever it might be, if I'm cutting that in half, I can still make good money, still put money away for retirement, not have to dig into my other assets, but be in a much happier place.
And Dave, so if we break down, so we've talked about three different scenarios here and different people in phases of their life. But overall, there's something that I think we need to talk about, and that's just making sure we have a plan. I think that's something that everyone is coming and saying, Dave, here's all my options. What do I do? But I think what you're saying in all of this is make sure you have a plan way before you get to your retirement doorstep.
Yeah, and it's true. You've got to start. I mean, from the saving side, obviously, the earlier you can start, the better. Had a client, another one that, and this was back during the 1990s. Now you got to understand, 1990s was one of the best investment periods time you could have had. You put 100 grand in 1990. By the end of that decade, you had $600,000. Now you kept it in the market. Right after that, everything collapsed there at the beginning of the early 2000s. But I had a client who his dad or his grandfather put $16,000 into an account when he was a kid, and he got into the right investment. Obviously did very well during that period of time. He had $1 million by the end of the 1990s. So it's all about time. So we want to start early on investing. There's nothing that can replace the compounding interest and the power of that. But then when it comes to Social Security, Medicare, long-term care, all these things, once we get into our 40s and 50s, we've really got to seriously start looking at how they're going to impact things and what we've got to do to make sure we're prepared for those issues as they relate to our retirement.
Well, Dave, I appreciate you entertaining our new theme. I went on to do something new today because I really want to make sure that we are not only just asking you a lot of questions in retirement, but we're also breaking down some of the details, because it's nice once in a while to hear some other stories to say, hey, I'm not doing so bad, or I may be off the mark, or I want to retire early, but you're kind of opening some new doors and some new eyes for those people that are here saying, yes, I'm in this boat. But the thing I really like that you always say is that, let's say I haven't done a great job and I'm ready to retire, or I want to retire at some point, but I haven't done anything. I've just really been lax on this because I focus more on my vacations. I focus more on my day-to-day life, and I haven't done anything with retirement. How do I get moving and get off of the couch?
Yeah, the biggest thing you've got to do is really look at your saving and your spending. I mean, it's going back to the basics that are taught by some of the financial educators out there that talk about financial literacy and how we deal with that. You've just got to start spending less, saving more. I mean, really, if you've done nothing, that's your only options. You've got to be able to figure out, and you can earn more. I mean, I can't say that you shouldn't do that as well, that if there's opportunities for you to earn more money, but you're going to have to change your lifestyle. It's not going to be what it's been. I saw that with one of my neighbors when I was living in Las Vegas. You know, they're making $250,000 a year, which is a great income, but they needed $350,000 to be able to live. And then they'd come in, they end up being a client of mine from an accounting side back then. And they'd complain to me all the time about, the world and how bad it was and how they just couldn't get ahead in life. And I'm thinking, wait, you've got an amazing business doing very well. It's your spending. You guys just can't control that. And they finally figured it out a decade or two later, but for them, it's too late. I mean, they're in position now. There's no way they're going to accumulate the money they need, but it's getting started, making those changes, making a commitment to yourself. We had someone bring up, and I can't remember where it was, CR, but they talked about, maybe it was a question that was brought up, we talked about here. What happens when you live in a society that expects you to have all these things? You got to start understanding your happiness and what you're trying to accomplish and where you're going to be in the future has got to be far more important than what other people think about you. Because what we find is most of them don't think as much about you as you think they do. That maybe someone says something and it offends you or it affects you, but the reality of it, it's your life. You got to figure all that stuff out for yourself.
I think that's such great advice. Dave, once again, thank you for being here and coming and talking about these different scenarios with us today and doing something a little different. It's always fun to throw something in here like this. And I want to thank those that have been here with us live and those on replay. Again, the most important thing we do with education is we act on it. It's great to have all that information, but it's important that we take the next step. So if you are not in the retirement position yet, I encourage you to just start small, start somewhere, because that's going to be the next best thing for you versus sitting back saying, I'm never going to get there. I'm never going to be there, because each of these scenarios, they may not be you, but that's the thing we need to talk about, is making sure that you are not keeping up with the Joneses. You're not trying to keep up with everyone else. Hey, look, I would love to have spent $2,000 and been at a Braves game, but I did just as well at home, with my dinner. So I think we just have to give and take on those pieces. So that's an important piece I think we look at as we end here, Dave.
And CR, one last thing I will tell everybody too, you educate yourself. We've got so many educational opportunities out there. Learn these things, because again, even if you take some, let's say, CR, hey, you're in a position, you just can't save any additional money. You can't get anywhere else. Well, what if you make the right decision with Social Security? What if you make the right decision with Medicare? Those two programs alone can completely help secure your retirement. If you do the right things, they're going to change what it looks like. Maybe it means you have to work a couple more years, but if you're able to do that and then get more out of your Social Security and you claim Medicare correctly, so you don't have a bunch of out-of-pocket issues that you've got to do. I mean, it's all education. So don't think that just because you can't save millions of dollars, you can't fix your retirement. A lot of other things that affect that are based upon wise choices that you've got to make.
And Dave, with that, I'm going to say the retirementriskadvisors.com. You can go on and get all the details. We have an education page where you can go and gather information from your podcast. You've got a brand new podcast that's out. You've got lots of webinars that you're part of. And I just want to encourage everyone to get signed up and get to be part of those so you can further your education in that retirement.
Absolutely.
All right, everyone. Thank you so much for being here with us. And we'll see you guys again next Wednesday. And Dave, it looks like we may be live or you may be on your own. We'll see, because we're supposed to be hanging out again together.
Yeah, we'll see how that works out.
And we'll see you guys all again next week, and have a good week.
Bye.